list of participants that I have with us here today. A few of you have called in as a call-in user, so it doesn't show me your name. So I will take a minute then after I've gone through the list of folks whose names I do see here on the list to allow for additional self-introductions. And then I'm going to turn it over for a minute to Sam Sanford, who's going to share some information about kind of some housekeeping items for our new format that we have today. One thing I just wanted to note up front is that today's meeting is being recorded. As many of you are familiar, when we host our meetings within the Sandag offices and via phone, in the past we've used our Soniclear tool to record the audio meeting so that it can be later listened to online, and kind of keeping with that trend, we are recording today's meeting so that the audio will also be available later for folks to listen to after the meeting. So I note so far here on the meeting today, we have Sam Sanford from Sandag. We also have Kendall Reynolds from our production department assisting us with the meeting today. Nesamani Calendar from APCD, as well as Stephanie Parent, from ARB, as well as Stephanie Parent from ARB, Elisa Arias and Richard Radcliffe from Sandag, Sue Alpert from Sandag, Brenda Perez from FTA, Lexi Ariano, Lucas Sanchez, both from Caltrans, Michelle Blake from Caltrans, District 11, Nick Cormier from APCD, and I believe we have a couple of other callers as well that I don't see your names and agencies included. Can you please take a moment to introduce yourselves?
Hi, morning, everyone. I'm Ziying Ouyang from Sandag.
Good morning, Ying. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, morning, Rachel.
Good morning.
Dawn Batiste from Sandag is on the line as well.
Good morning, Dawn. And I see John Kelly has also joined us as well from US EPA. Morning, John.
Morning.
And do we have any other meeting participants? Nope. Okay. Well, hearing none, I'll turn it over to Sam for a minute to share some of the housekeeping items with our new format.
Good morning, everyone. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. The recordings are used to post to Sandag's website for record of the meeting. The slides and the audio are what are being recorded, not the images of presenters or persons or those thumbnail images. We ask that if you are not speaking to please mute your microphone. You can do that in the participants pane. If you look at the menu in WebEx, there is an outline of a person, and that is the participants pane. Click on that, you'll see who's on the WebEx with us, and then there's to the far right of your name, there's a little microphone where you can click that on and off for toggling your microphone. In addition, there is a raised hand function within WebEx that we can use. Again, it's in the participant pane. Next, immediately right to your name, there's a little hand icon when you hover over your name, and you can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. With this particular group being a small group that's very well rehearsed at the teleconference process, I don't see that being a big concern, but it is a feature that we can utilize within this platform. Those are all the notes I have for this. I'll turn it back to Rachel.
Thank you, Sam. Hopefully everyone has found it easy to connect via the WebEx this morning. Our first item that we have on, or our next item we have on the agenda is the meeting minutes from our January 2020 meeting, and those were attached to the agenda package. Does anyone have any questions or corrections for the meeting minutes? No? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move to the public comments and communications and member comments. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Conformity Working Group on any issue within the jurisdiction of Sandag that's not on this agenda. Do we have any members of the public who would like to address the CWG today? Okay. Or any member comments or communications that would like to be shared here?
We can't hear you, Rachel.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for letting me know. So item number 3 was public comments and communications and member comments. And this is an opportunity for members of the public who may be participating in today's meeting to address the CWG on any items that are not part of this agenda. It's also an opportunity for members to share comments that they may wish to share with the CWG. Do we have any members of the public on the call today who would like to share or address the CWG? Okay, and any member comments that would like to be shared at this time, we also have the opportunity towards the end of the meeting as well for member information to be shared. Okay, hearing none, we'll move to item number 4, which is the ozone state implementation plan development. Nick Cormier from APCD is going to provide a presentation and information on this item. And I just wanted to highlight to the group that Sam sent out an email this morning. Today, the draft SIP was released for public review and comment. And so earlier this morning, prior to the meeting, you were sent a subsequent email that had information on that document as well. So hopefully everyone received that, and I will turn it over to Nick to share his presentation.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
Yes.
And thank you for sending out that link this morning and working with us on getting that out. And understandably, everyone hasn't had a chance to fully read all 668 pages of the attainment plan, so I understand that. But this will, hopefully this presentation will be a good, it'll be a good precursor to diving into that document. So this presentation will be very similar to the one that we will be presenting at the workshop. So the Conformity Working Group's getting somewhat of a sneak peek on what will happen next week with our webinars that we're doing. But more on that to come in this presentation. So let me share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see the presentation now. I see nodding heads, so that's good. The APCD has collaborated with the US EPA, CARB, SANDAG, and other agencies to draft a new plan that provides the blueprint for how the region will further reduce air pollution in order to attain the national ambient air quality standards for ozone. The APCD released the draft plan this morning and will hold online public workshops in the format of a webinar on July 9th and July 13th to gather and consider public input, and then finalize the proposed plan for the board's consideration in late September 2020. The following presentation provides an overview of the draft plan and reflects the information we plan to present during the public workshops. As always, we welcome the CWG's members' suggestions, comments, and questions at any time. So here's an overview of today's presentation. First, I'll briefly discuss the nature of ozone pollution as a refresher and its adverse impacts on public health. Next, I'll briefly identify the government agencies charged with regulating and reducing ozone air pollution. I'll then review the key actions already taken to reduce ozone pollution and additional actions that are warranted to further reduce ozone pollution. I'll then highlight the contents of the draft ozone attainment plan, including proposed new on-road emission budgets for San Diego County and what the contents of the plan means for local businesses. I'll then finally review our next steps and timeline moving forward. So just as a refresher to everyone, what exactly does cause ozone pollution? Ozone pollution is formed when common air pollutants emitted by all sources, including vehicles, off-road equipment, factories, consumer products, and other sources, chemically react under the influence of sunlight and heat. Concentration of ozone pollution is as dependent on the sunshine temperature as it is on the presence of ozone-forming emissions. This ozone is harmful to breathe and therefore is regulated as an air pollutant at the national and state level. Another way to think of it is ground level ozone pollution is bad, what we consider bad, and atmospheric ozone, which is found in the upper layers of the atmosphere, or otherwise known as the ozone layer, is typically considered good. That protects us from harmful UV rays and that sort of thing. So the sprawling metropolis of San Diego, with its sunny climate, topographic features, and proximity to the Pacific Ocean, is particularly well suited to ozone pollution formation and its buildup. Air pollution is emitted throughout the populated coastal plain. The ocean breeze blows it eastward across the inland valleys. As the emissions move eastward, they have time to react under sunlight to form ozone, which then becomes trapped against the foothills and mountains. At the same time, the cooler marine air displaces the warmer air aloft, creating an inversion layer in the atmosphere that traps the ozone pollution below it, which makes it act like a lid. That is why the district's air monitoring station in Alpine, located at an elevation of around 2,000 feet, experiences higher summertime ozone levels than other areas of the region. Although ozone levels are lower in the populated coastal plain, the entire region is considered ozone non-attainment because sources throughout the region contribute to ozone pollution in downwind Alpine. Ozone pollution is most appropriately addressed through a regional plan, given that sources throughout the region contribute to ozone pollution levels. Whereas much of the populated coastal plain has good air quality with respect to ozone, communities are impacted by localized air pollution from nearby roadways, factories, and port operations, and other things of that nature. Pursuant to state law, we are implementing a separate community air protection program. APCD has partnered with the Portside Environmental Justice community to measure air pollution and reduce health impacts in the neighborhoods of Barrio Logan, Logan Heights, Sherman Heights, and Western National City. APCD is working with a community steering committee to draft a plan called a CERP, C-E-R-P, which is a separate but complementary plan to the one today, which will drive deployment of cleaner technologies and reduce exposure to air pollution in these neighborhoods. The draft CERP will consider incentives-based strategies as well as regulatory, land use, and transportation strategies to reduce localized air pollution. The CERP will be released for feedback later this year. Going back to ozone, the health impacts of ozone are well studied. In short, ozone makes it harder to breathe. It irritates and inflames the air passageways, and typical symptoms include headache, cough, shortness of breath, and chest tightness when taking a deep breath. As with any health issue, impacts vary widely by person. Children and seniors are at increased risk of health impacts. So are people with existing lung disease and those who spend time outdoors. In sunny San Diego, that basically means all of us. And because ozone is fueled by sunshine, ozone concentrations are highest in the spring and summer months. The APCD is part of a coordinated three-tiered approach to regulate and clean up ozone and other air pollution. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, regulates emissions from interstate traveling sources such as airplanes, trains, and ships. Plus, they regulate large stationary sources of air pollution, such as the biggest factories in the region through federal permitting programs. The California Air Resources Board regulates emissions from on-road and off-road vehicles within California, and from a broad spectrum of consumer products that we all use on an everyday basis, such as personal care products and household cleaners and solvents. The APCD is primarily responsible for regulating stationary sources in the region, such as large industrial facilities, including power plants and landfills, and smaller commercial establishments such as gas stations and dry cleaners. So what actions have we taken to improve our air quality to date? To summarize, the APCD has adopted over 300 new and amended rules to control and reduce air pollution from a broad array of stationary sources. Staff will continue to implement and enforce these rules in order to safeguard air quality and public health. However, mobile sources make a much larger contribution to air pollution, and reducing their emissions is a key strategy for attaining the ozone standards throughout the region. Accordingly, APCD has entered into an agreement with CARB to assist with local enforcement of the state's regulations for heavy-duty diesel trucks and off-road equipment. APCD is the only air district in California with dedicated mobile source inspectors. The purpose is to ensure that these sources are as clean as they are supposed to be. APCD has long implemented grant programs to provide monetary incentives for sources to voluntarily achieve emission reductions beyond what is required by law or regulation. In these programs to date, the APCD has allocated $131 million to businesses to upgrade to cleaner, more efficient vehicles and equipment at a reduced cost. Each dollar invested is estimated to result in $3 to $30 in economic benefits due to fewer workday losses, fewer school days missed, and reduced healthcare related costs. As a result of these actions, air quality in the San Diego region currently meets 5 of the 6 health-based standards or limits set by the EPA, as shown here. Ozone is the only air pollutant in the region that does not meet the respective national standards. Further reduction in ozone pollution is necessary, especially in the inland areas, in order to meet the ozone standard. That is the very purpose of the draft ozone plan that was released today. Emissions of ozone-forming emissions have been trending downward as a result of the clean air actions highlighted earlier. As can be seen here in this chart, emissions have dropped by 58% since the year 2000. In fact, emissions are now at their lowest levels on record. This is remarkable considering the regional and economic growth that has occurred over the years in the same time frame. These emission reductions have resulted in improved air quality, as can be seen here in this chart. This is the trend line for ozone pollution as measured in Alpine, where ozone levels have trended downward over the years. There is year-to-year variability caused by weather, and the upticks in ozone are associated with hotter years. Overall, these upticks reflect a flattening of progress as opposed to a major change in the complete opposite or wrong direction. Regardless, it's clear that the additional progress is necessary in order to meet the standards and protect public health throughout the region. But how does San Diego's ozone pollution problem compare with metropolitan areas in the state? It's not necessarily an apples to apples comparison because each air district has its own meteorology and topography and has a mix of different emission sources. Regardless, other areas have also made progress. However, each of the large air districts are non-attainment for one or both standards, meaning that ozone pollution can still reach unhealthful levels at times. It is the goal of each of these air districts to further reduce emissions in order to attain the standards and protect public health. So what are San Diego's key challenges to attaining these standards? In short, mobile sources. Mobile sources are regulated at the state and federal levels. They're the number one challenge to attaining the ozone standards in San Diego. Mobile sources generate over 90% of the NOx emissions in San Diego County and are driving the ozone pollution levels here. This underscores the importance of the district's efforts to facilitate mobile source emission reductions through our incentive grant programs and our mobile source compliance programs. In terms of the highest rated categories of NOx, the first is heavy-duty diesel trucks, which include big rigs and medium heavy-duty diesel trucks. Second would be ships, which include Navy ships, auto carriers, container ships, and cruise ships. Third would be off-road equipment, tractors, loaders, backhoes, transportation, refrigeration units. 4 would be cars and light trucks of the on-road variety. Fifth would be aircraft, which include military and commercial jets. Sixth is commercial and recreational vehicles, which include tugboats, fishing vessels, and pleasure craft. And then seventh, which is the sources that San Diego APCD regulates, would be stationary sources of pollution, which we said includes power plants and much smaller sources throughout the region. Climate change and rising temperatures are a challenge to the region's ozone attainment efforts. San Diego has experienced average annual temperatures well above the average in recent years, which contributed to an uptick in ozone levels just as the region was nearing attainment of the 75 parts per billion ozone standard, which is the 2008 ozone standard. But there is good news. Since greenhouse gases are often co-emitted with ozone-forming pollutants, the two problems can be tackled together through many of the same emissions reduction strategies. So before I get into the few slides, I did want to have a comparison for what exactly a ton per day is and what it equates to, as that's kind of an odd metric sometimes that people who are unfamiliar with air quality, the term is thrown around a lot. So for context, 1 ton per day of NOx emissions is equal to roughly around 350,000 average passenger cars. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the next slide. So as described in the draft ozone plan that we released today, ozone-forming emissions are projected to continue to decline in the region, with a 10% drop by 2026 and a 14% drop by 2032 compared to 2020 levels. This will be achieved by continuing to implement all existing measures, as well as recent and planned rulemakings to control and reduce emissions from the source categories like boilers, engines, and paints and coatings at APCD's statutory level. And we will also continue to expand our local incentive programs, offering programs like a local vehicle scrap program, as well as partnering with SANDAG and the California Energy Commission to offer a regional EV charger program here in San Diego County very soon. Similarly, CARB is developing programs to further reduce emissions from heavy-duty trucks, which are the #1 source of air pollution in our region, as we saw earlier. One of these was actually adopted last week, which was the Advanced Clean Trucks Regulation. CARB has conducted air quality modeling to forecast San Diego's future ozone levels. CARB's model used complex computer programs, sophisticated computer hardware, and large databases to calculate the impact of San Diego's emissions, meteorology, and photochemistry have on air pollution levels. The result is a set of predictions for future ozone levels. The model predicts that ozone levels will continue declining as a result of the projected emission reductions, and the region is predicted to attain the 75 parts per billion standard in 2026, which is the 2008 standard, and the 70 parts per billion standard in 2032, which is the 2015 ozone standard. Federal law allows more time to attain the standard, but that will trigger a classification of severe non-attainment status. Today, we are currently a serious non-attainment area for the 2008 ozone standard and a moderate non-attainment area for the 2015 ozone standard. The predicted attainment years of 2026 and 2032 are consistent with the Federal Clean Air Act deadlines of a severe non-attainment area for both ozone standards. But while the Clean Air Act does allow additional time to attain, it's not necessarily considered a free pass to continue status quo conditions. With the severe reclassification does come more requirements, particularly for stationary sources and some on-road transportation. In regard to transportation conformity, the draft ozone plan will require a 30% drop in road transportation emissions by 2026 and a 40% drop by 2032, relative to 2020 emission levels. These estimates were prepared with assistance from CARB using the most up-to-date models and activity data and reflect new stringent requirements for rounding up to the nearest tenth of a ton. Also, there are budgets for each ozone standard that are the same for a given year. For example, the budgets for 2023 and 2026 for both ozone standards are the same for the ease of implementation. We can further discuss the emission budgets in greater detail at the conclusion of the presentation, since that's probably most applicable to this group. But we can continue to discuss that after the presentation. As you can see, there are also multiple years of budgets now, quite a bit more than previous ozone plans. This is due to the predicted years of attainment for both ozone standards being different and a new non-attainment classification for the area, which will be severe. Stationary sources of air pollution, as I mentioned, will be required to do more. These include revisions to what we consider as a major source under federal permitting programs. For example, major sources considered in our Title V and New Source Review federal permitting programs right now have thresholds of either 100 or 50 tons per year to be subject to additional requirements, controls, monitoring, and/or offsets. With the severe reclassification, that threshold will go down to 25 tons per year, which will bring in more sources into those respective programs. At current time, we believe this will probably only affect around 25 additional sources that would get pulled into these programs, and many of which have already been notified of this coming change for the last year or two. So a severe reclassification is necessary for the reasons we noted today. As such, the plan that we released this morning follows state and federal guidance to forecast attainment by 2026 for the 2008 standard and 2032 for the 2015 ozone standard. It includes existing and predicted regional air quality data and emission inventories. It also includes an analysis of existing pollution reduction measures and how we will continue reducing ozone through 2032 and beyond, as well as measures that may also be adopted between now and then to provide additional reductions. The plan also includes demonstrations required by the Clean Air Act to ensure that the region continues to make annual emission reduction progress, as well as a demonstration that the region cannot attain any sooner than the predicted attainment years. Finally, the plan includes an attainment demonstration using CARB modeling to conclude that the attainment years predicted are appropriate and satisfy all criteria. As Rachel mentioned, you probably received a link to our website this morning that has the links to the documents. But if not, you can visit this short link that we included in the presentation where it will direct you to all of the documents that we're talking about today. So as I mentioned, the plan is somewhat long, at least for our compared to what we've been through in the past on SIPs. But that is primarily because it does cover 2 ozone standards at once, which makes it somewhat of a confusing document. But the following chart kind of breaks down how that document is set up for both ozone standards. Section 1 and 2 of the document provides information that is complementary and shared between both ozone standards. Section 3 then focuses on specific requirements for the 2008 ozone standard. And then similarly, Section 4 focuses in only on requirements only for the 2015 ozone standard. In particular, the transportation conformity section for each of the ozone standards can be found in each respective section of Section 3 or 4, which are highlighted in the table here. You'll find that the verbiage between Sections 3 and 4 is in some cases largely identical, but in terms of numbers and the years that need to be demonstrated, that's where things differ between the 2 sections. Now that we've released our draft document, it's important to engage with important stakeholders. APCD has started notifying and conducted extensive outreach to the following groups to provide transparency and open lines of communication. We certainly encourage everyone's participation during the upcoming workshops or before or after to receive feedback on the draft plan. We also welcome other ideas to spread the word to various groups. So here are our next steps. We released the draft document in SQL analysis today. We will be holding 2 webinars on the draft plan on July 9th and July 13th, respectively. The presentation, like I said, will resemble very closely to what you're hearing today. We are soliciting comments on the plan and corresponding CEQA analysis through July 31st, 2020, which is the end of the month. We are then planning to go to our APCD advisory committee in August for approval of the documents. And then following that action, we would be taking the plans and the CEQA analysis to our local air pollution control board in late September for their consideration and hopeful approval. If the local air pollution control board adopts the plan and approves the plan, we would then submit those documents to the CARB board, which would then need to consider and approve the documents likely in late October. And then if upon their approval, it would then be submitted to the EPA shortly thereafter for their consideration. Finally, this is just some contact information that has my contact info as well as our new interim director, Robert Ryder, although many people know him as the deputy director and planning director. Previously has now been appointed recently as the interim director of APCD. His contact info, as well as my supervisor, Kathy Kean, all of our contact information is there. Feel free to contact us. And then all of the draft plans are available on our website, as well as some fact sheets that we prepared that provide people with a little bit of background on ozone, why it's an issue here, and simple ways that the average person can reduce air pollution to be part of solving the problem. There's things that people can do every day at home that can assist us in reducing air pollution and reducing ozone. So those fact sheets are also available on the website as well. And with that, that's all I have for today, but I'd be happy to take any questions or comments if we have them. And I think Sam might be taking care of handling any comments that might have come in, or I'm not sure how you want to do that, Sam, but I'm free to answer questions as they come in.
Thank you, Nick. We appreciate the presentation.
Thanks, Nick. Yes, I do not see any raised hands yet.
Do we have any questions for Nick?
I do. This is Elisa. Nick, great presentation. Thank you. You mentioned that with the reclassification, there are some additional on-road requirements and some additional stationary source requirements. And I think you mentioned Title V, a sample of additional sources that will require to do some reporting. For the on-road regulations, can you tell us what additional regulations come into play with the reclassification?
Sure, it's really just a mention of not necessarily in particular an additional regulation. It's more of the ratcheting down of on-road emissions that needs to take place over time. That's really what that is in reference to, and that's evident by the budgets that are seen in slide, let's see, 18. I can go back if anybody needs to, but that the ratcheting down is really just in reference to what that was mentioning too.
Okay.
In previous years, we didn't need to do that, but with a reclassification to severe, on-road transportation as well as mobile source transportation in general needs to be ratcheted down as much as we can, since it's a driver of ozone pollution here in the county.
And I have one more question. You also mentioned that meteorology has an impact on I guess violations or meeting or not meeting the standards. And I noticed that you were showing temperatures increasing through 2018, 2019 seemed to be lower temperature. So is there a possibility that as the district monitors data, and I guess you look at this every year, right? But there's some kind of 3-year average or something that we look at. Is it possible that at some point we might be able to go back to a less stringent standard, say serious or moderate?
Well, let me unpack that a little bit. So yes, we do depending on the ozone level, which we call the design value, is the 3-year average that you're talking about, which is, so our design value for 2019 takes into account the average ozone levels from 2017, 2018, and 2019, and then takes the 4th high of those years and then averages them to get your design value. So realistically, it's kind of taking into account multiple years, including the current year, to get your current design value. So that the charts will reflect, you know, the meteorology through 2019, but it won't necessarily, you know, it won't necessarily tell you that, you know, hey, 2019 was a really clean year, and it was one of the cleanest years on record. But our ozone design value, which is the 3-year average, it's dropping, but it hasn't dropped significantly enough for us to attain the standards yet. So that's kind of the first part. The second part of your question, which is potentially ratcheting back to like a serious or moderate non-attainment status, if I understood right, in the future, if ozone levels improve. I don't think so, but I'd have to further look into that to see if that's. Was that someone?
Hi, this is John Kelly. I thought if you want, I can weigh in on that.
Yeah, go for it, John.
Okay, Elisa. I'm sorry, Elisa.
Yeah. Hi, John.
Hi. The answer to your question, I think, is that when we designate an area, we classify it, and that's generally a one-way street. You can think of it for a particular standard. And when we implement, we also implement based on the highest classification of all previous versions of the standard. So the way to get out of any kind of requirement, if you have a higher classification, is really only in the scenario if there's a new standard and the area is classified at a lower classification, and then it's redesignated to attainment for the previous standard that had the higher classification. Otherwise, even that might be a questionable. I can think of a scenario where that doesn't even happen. So basically, once you're severe, it's going to stay with you. Yeah, the only thing that will change is if you get redesignated to attainment. So there's no mechanism. We don't basically. I want you to know that we don't track the air quality for purposes of adjusting the classification. Classification is given at the time of designation, and there's actually a requirement that we use the same data that we use to designate the area as to whether it meets the standard or not. To use that same data to classify the area as to the severity, how bad it is, not attained. Does that help answer your question? I mean, I could probably go on about this for a while.
Yeah, no, that helps. I just wasn't sure if, we are doing better in the future, whether we could be reclassified back to a less stringent classification.
Okay, well, if you do better in the future, I mean, like if the area was to attain early, there's always the possibility an area can get clean data determination, which, the main effect of that would be if there were outstanding plans that the district hadn't submitted yet. There might be some flexibility on not submitting those. But given the fact that these timelines for attainment are pretty far out in the future, I suspect all the SIPs will be submitted by the time clean data is seen. But the other thing that can happen is if the area attains early, the area can, of course, ask for a redesignation to attainment, which it's done before successfully for 1 hour and 97 standards. And may consider doing for the 2008 standard if the area changed early. But I suspect, given the recent meteorology, that it's unlikely. But you know, that would be one avenue to get out, is if the area was attained early. But it wouldn't change the classification. It would simply change the status from non-attainment to attainment.
That helps. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that context. I couldn't have answered that better myself. So.
All right.
Any other questions for Nick on the draft SIP? Okay. Well, hearing none.
I think there might be.
My hand. This is
Okay.
Stephanie Parent.
Stephanie? Oh, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Nick, I just wanted to maybe ask a clarifying question. There was a slide where you talked about how CARB regulates mobile sources. And then if I'm wrong, correct me, but like for the ships and aircraft, those are handled by the federal government. So I just wanted to clarify that, just in case, like if you're presenting that to the public so that they understand. And I didn't see trains accounted for in there, but there's probably a specific reason, or maybe I missed it. Thanks.
Yeah, Stephanie, thank you for the comment. This presentation is a work in progress, so I'll double check that those references are correct, and maybe I'll work with you offline to make sure those are all accounted for correctly. But yeah, we'll make sure that's all dialed in prior to the workshops. But I appreciate the comment.
Any other comments or questions for Nick? Okay. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, Nick. And I know we're looking forward to delving into the document and also attending the upcoming workshops later this month. So thank you for all that information.
Definitely, thank you.
Our next agenda item is number 5, which kind of builds on some of the information that Nick talked about in item 4. To support the development of APCD's 2015 Ozone State Implementation Plan, the California Air Resources Board has done some supporting analysis as it relates to vehicle miles offset demonstration and latest program transportation control measures, and Nesamani from ARB is here to share information for this item.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. I think it was a nice presentation, Nick. I think you gave a good summary of the whole plan. I think this is one element of that plan itself, the VMT emission offset demonstration. So I'll just give again, this is a short presentation. I'll just kind of give you the results, summary of the results. It would be helpful when you read the plan itself. So with that background, maybe first I'll give some requirements and the requirements of the Clean Air Act. First, I'll talk about that, and then also share some results from the analysis itself here. So this slide, I think currently, thanks Sam for showing the slides. That's great. So the slide itself shows, like, as part of Clean Air Act requirements, states to offset growth in emissions due to growth in VMT or trips through TCS and TCMs for VOC emissions. So TCS are generally like transportation control strategies, a broad term, which includes many control strategies such as I&M program, alternative fuels program, and technology-based measures. On the other hand, TCM, transportation control measures that are reduces emissions from transportation sources such as VMT, vehicle trips, or congestion. The strategies includes improved transit system, HOV lanes, trip reduction ordinance, or traffic flow improvements there. VMT offset is required for areas classified as severe or extreme. For 70 ppb ozone standard, San Diego, Coachella, and Western Mojave are classified as severe, and South Coast and San Joaquin Valley are classified as extreme. As Nick mentioned, this plan also covers for 75 pp ozone standard. San Diego is also classified as severe for 75 pp standard here. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, this slide shows the methodology for quantifying the VMT offset analysis here. As you can see, this consists of 4 steps, four-step process here. In this analysis for 70 pp ozone standard, so 2017 is the base year and 2032 is the attainment year for areas classified as severe. For 75 pp ozone standard, 2011 is the base year and 2026 is the attainment year for areas classified as severe. In step 1, the base year VOC emissions are calculated based on VMT in that year, with all enforceable TCS and TCMs are in place. In step 2, what happens is like the VOC emissions are calculated for the attainment year based on projected VMT and trips for that year, and assumes that no TCS or TCMs beyond those already reflected in the base year calculation itself. This step demonstrates increase in emissions due to VMT and trips. That's what the step 2 demonstrates here. In step 3, the attainment year emissions are calculated with no TCS or TCMs beyond those already reflected in the base year, but would also assume that there was no growth in VMT as well between the base year and the attainment year. In other words, the emissions estimated in this step is called VMT offset ceiling for attainment year emissions. The step 4 is represents emissions that are actually expected to occur in the attainment year after taking into account of all enforceable TCS and TCMs that Nick discussed in his presentation earlier. So if emissions in step 4 is less than or equal to the emission ceiling established in step 3, this would offset the identified growth in emissions. In other words, you don't need to do any additional TCS or TCMs. If emissions estimated in step 4 is greater than the emissions ceiling, then we need to identify additional TCS or TCMs to offset the growth in emissions. Yeah, next slide, please. So this slide shows the results for 70 pp ozone standard here in this presentation. So we used MFAC's 2017 model to estimate the emissions with Safe Vehicle Rule Part 1 adjustment factors. The activity data is based on SANDAG's 2019 federal plan that they adopted at the end of last year. In this chart, the first blue bar represents the first step where control measures and VMT are at 2017 level. In San Diego region, it is about 18.2 tons per day of VOC emissions. The red bar represents the step 2, where control measures are at 2017 level and VMT are at the 2032 level, which is 10.3 tons per day of VOC. Green bar represents step 3, where control measures and VMT are at the 2017 level, that's the base year level. This acts as a ceiling, VMT offset ceiling here. And then the blue bar represents the actual emissions in the attainment year with all the existing control measures and forecasted VMT, which comes down to be 8.3 tons per day. For San Diego region, attainment year emissions is less than the ceiling emissions, which indicates existing TCS and TCMs are sufficient to offset growth in emissions. So that's for the 70 pp ozone standard. Next slide, please. So this slide shows VMT offset demonstration again for 75 pp ozone standard. It's the same process we did. We used MFAC 2017 model and activity data again from SANDAG's latest 2019 federal plan. And then the chart represents, the first blue bar represents here the first step of the process where control measures and VMT are at the 2011 level. In San Diego region, it is about 32.6 tons per day of VOC emissions. And then the red bar represents the step 2, where the control measures are at the 2011 level and VMT are at the 2026 level, which is 11.7 tons per day of VOC. And then the green bar represents the step 3, the control measures and VMT are at the 2011 level. This acts as a VMT offset ceiling. The blue bar represents the actual emissions in the attainment year with all the existing control measures and forecasted VMT, which is 10.2 2 tons per day of VOC emissions or ROG. So again, this in Sandag region, the emissions, the attainment emissions are less than the emission ceiling, which indicates the existing TCS and TCMs are sufficient to offset any growth in emissions. So that pretty much concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions or yeah. Thank you again. Thanks, Rachel and Sam, for coordinating on this.
Sure. Thank you, Nasamani. What's a little echoey? Within the agenda package that we also included attachments starting on page
I think, yeah, page 13.
12, yeah.
Yeah, 13, yeah.
12, 13. So the slides that Nasamani showed are included in the agenda package, and then we also included a listing of the different TCMs that were included in the 2019 RTP and that were programmed in recent years in our RTIP to support this analysis. So that's also included for your information.
Yeah,
does
thanks,
anyone?
Rachel. That's,
sure.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Nasamani on this item? Sam, do you have anyone with a hand raised?
There are no hand raised at this point.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions.
There are no hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. There's no questions for Nasamani. We can move to item number 6, which is the 2021 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, Conformity Criteria and Procedures. And I will turn it over to Sue Alpert to kick off this item, and we'll have a few different staff members sharing information for the different subcomponents of this item. Sue? Oh, Sue, we can't hear you. Sue, I still don't hear you. Sam, can you unmute Sue? It shows her as unmuted, but when she's speaking, I don't hear her.
I believe she is muted on her machine, not through WebEx at this time.
Okay.
It shows she's using a headset. Maybe that's the problem.
Oh.
Sending a message to Sue.
I think she's putting her headset on.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yep. Now we can hear you, Sue. We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah. All right. Thank you. And now let's get back to the presentation. So yes, at a special federal California Federal Programming Group meeting for MPOs that was held on June 3rd, 2020, a decision was made to move forward with updating the 2021 Federal State Transportation Improvement Program, or the FSTIP, which had been delayed due to uncertainties related to the Safe Vehicle Rules Part 1 and 2. The state has set a due date of March 1st, 2021 for submittal of an MPO's approved FTIP. So today we are kicking off the process with a review of the conformity procedures, including the revenue constrained program assumptions, the regional growth forecast, travel demand model, emissions models and budgets, and the transportation control measures and public involvement and outreach process. So before we begin those items, I did want to quickly go over the schedule. So the proposed schedule, thanks Sam, for updating the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or the RTIP, is provided in attachment 1. And the dates that are especially relevant to this group are highlighted. So by July 30th, we plan to submit the 2021 project list to the CWG for interagency consultation and discussion at the August 5th CWG meeting. During the months of August and September, we will code the projects in the model. And on October 6th, we will issue the draft conformity analysis for a 30-day review and comment. This will be discussed at the November 4th CWG meeting. On December 11th, the board will be asked to release the draft 2021 RTIP, including its air quality conformity demonstration, for a 30-day public comment period. At that same time, SANDAG will submit the draft to state and federal agencies for review. A public hearing will be scheduled for the February 5th Transportation Committee meeting, and the board will be asked to adopt the final 2021 RTIP on February 26, 2021. The statewide public comment period will begin on March 8th, with federal approval expected on April 16, 2021. So moving into the financial assumptions, and that begins on page 44, the attachment 2 of your agenda packet. These are the assumptions that will be used to develop the 2021 RTIP. Due to a variety of reasons, this year is a challenging year to prepare financial assumptions. We have opted to be as conservative as possible with our major fund sources to mitigate the uncertainty created by the lack of a new Federal Highway Act, the global pandemic, decreasing demand for fuel, and volatile oil prices. Under inflation assumptions, inflation for state funds are based on the STIP fund estimate for 2020, which is 2.9% for operating expenses and 3.2% for capital expenses. Also, the CPI increase in the SB1 gas tax kicks in this year. For Transnet, SANDAG's sales tax measure revenue, the forecast was re-examined after the pandemic hit and therefore shows a 13% decline in revenue for 2021, with recovery by 2023 and an annual 3% increase per year after 2023. The Fixing America's Surface Transportation, or FAST Act, expires at the end of federal fiscal year 20. Despite the fact that a surface transportation reauthorization bill is circulating in the House of Representatives, at this time we do not have new federal highway legislation. Therefore, federal revenues for formula funds have been kept flat for the 5 years of the program, with a 2% increase in the amount that the state holds back for local assistance, which results actually in a slight decrease each year of federal revenue. The Regional Surface Block Grant and Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Programs will continue to be used by SANDAG for funding Transnet major corridor programs. SANDAG is also including several planning projects in its OWP, which are funded with federal formula funds, and these are programmed in the RTIP. The Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, fund sources have not changed, but our transit agencies have also received FTA 5339B competitive grants to fund low and zero emission vehicles. SANDAG was successful with its application for Federal Railroad Administration State of Good Repair funds, which will be included on a project to repair the Del Mar Bluffs along the Low Sand Corridor. This project also receives state TIRCP funding and will apply for Trade Corridor Enhancement Program funding. We've also received a federal infra grant and state coordinated border and infrastructure program funds for State Route 11 and the proposed new border crossing and port of entry, which is a joint effort with Mexico. For state revenues, we continue to have projects funded by the Active Transportation Program, Freeway Surface Patrol, State Transit Assistance, as well as the STIP and the SHOP. Under the Cap and Trade Program, the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program, and Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program funds projects for transit operators. SANDAG also received funding under the TARCP program for the construction of an extension to the Green and Orange lines in El Cajon, and also to support the Del Mar Bluff Stabilization Project, as I had mentioned, which will be programmed in the 2021 RTIP. SB1 has significantly supplemented transportation funding for local agencies and provided support for larger projects implemented by SANDAG through both formula and competitive programs. Sandag has competed successfully for funding for the I-5 North Coast Corridor, State Route 11, and the Otay Port of Entry and Central to Miramar track realignment, and expects to be successful for additional funding from the 2020 call for projects. Under local revenues on page 10, we continue to have the Transnet local sales tax, which includes several programs for major corridors, bicycle and pedestrian, transit, and environmental mitigation program funding. Future sales tax revenues have been heavily borrowed against to accelerate the implementation of projects in the ordinance, and we were transitioning to a pay-as-you-go program. Due to extremely low interest rates, bond issues have been refinanced to save significantly on interest and effectively create more revenue, and this opportunity will continue to be explored. In addition, the economic impact of COVID-19 is being reviewed frequently, and the forecast will be revised as necessary. Transnet also provides funds to local agencies for local streets and roads, and agencies will continue to program their funds available through Transnet, the Highway User Tax, SB1, and developer fees. Finally, TDA continues to provide a match and fund transit in the region. And of course, we also have various other program revenues in the 2021 RTIP, which will include private sector funding, investment earnings, and long-term debt, including innovative financing in the form of Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or TIFIA loan for the Midcoast project. So that sums up the assumptions mostly for the revenue. Are there any questions about these funding assumptions?
Does the group have any questions for Sue on the schedule or the revenue assumptions? No? Okay. Hearing no questions for Sue, I'm going to cover part 3, which is the 2050 regional growth forecast. So every 3 to 5 years, Sandag produces a long-range forecast of population, housing, and employment growth for the San Diego region. And for the 2021 RTIP, we will be using the Series 14 2050 Regional Growth Forecast, which was also used in development of the 2019 Federal Regional Transportation Program. And the agenda package includes information about the forecast, which has projections regarding population, jobs, and housing units within our region through the year 2050. And it's based largely upon the adopted general plans and community plans and policies of the 18 cities in the county of San Diego. Because many of the local general plans have horizon years of 2030, 20 years before the last year of the 2050 growth forecast. The latter part of the forecast was developed in collaboration with each of the local jurisdictions through an iterative process that allowed each city to provide their projections for land uses in those later years. And the Series 14th growth forecast is in compliance with 40 CFR 93-110A, which requires the latest planning assumptions in force available at the time that the conformity analysis began. So this is the same version of our forecast that was used in the 2019 regional plan, and we will be using it for the 2021 RTIP development. Are there any questions on the regional growth forecast? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to turn it to Ying for information on the travel demand model that we'll be using for the conformity analysis.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Can I have a question? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Like I tried to raise my hand and then couldn't unmute.
Sorry, go ahead.
Just a quick question about the growth forecast. Like, are there ever numbers shown for, because it shows like 4 million population and 2 million jobs. And I was curious if there's ever a breakdown for how many children are estimated to be in school, or, how many people are living in the homes, because just looking at the numbers like that, like, it seems odd, like, okay, 4 million people and 2 million jobs, but obviously not everybody has a job. So I didn't know if the information or data gets more detailed somewhere ever.
I might have to follow up with our folks in the demographics section as far as the level of detail that's available for all of the individual years for those elements of the population by age, etc. Ing, I don't know if you have any additional information on that.
Yeah, so we definitely have the population by age and by gender as well. So we have very disaggregated information. The chart that's showing here is more like a summary level. So if you're interested in your specific details, we definitely can provide that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ing.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the SANDAG model. So we used an update of its travel model, the second generation of our activity-based model. We call it ABM2 to evaluate the 2021 TIP conformity. SANDAG ABM2 takes the socioeconomic and demographic information from the regional growth forecast, as shown by, talked about by Rachel, and then highway and transit networks and transportation policies as inputs, and generate outputs such as VMT, mode share, trips, network level of service, and transit boardings. So this information is used to calculate measures of performance and impact, as well as emissions. So SANDAG ABM2 uses data from the 2016-2017 household travel survey and the 2015 transit onboard survey and observed traffic counts and transit ridership to calibrate the model to a base year of 2016 to capture the most up-to-date travel behavior. SANDAG ABM2 includes these updates and enhancements. So we converted the commercial transportation modeling package from Transcat to EMI, and also implemented a new model that explicitly models partially joint travel, specifically the drop-off and pick-up of children at school by parents. We also incorporate the implementation of strategic highway research program recommendations regarding improving the sensitivity of travel models to pricing and reliability. We also update the algorithm used to find transit passes, updated volume delay function parameters based upon an analysis of INRIX travel time data, replaced aggregate commercial vehicle model with an disaggregated commercial vehicle model and integrated it with the transportation model. Updated the external heavy truck model to incorporate the latest freight analysis framework, FAST4 data and projections. Implement an airport ground access model for the cross-border express called the CBX facility, serving the Tijuana International Airport. Updated the model to better match big data for special travel destinations, including beaches, parks, hospitals, and shopping malls. Also incorporated a new population synthesizer developed by SANDAG. So SANDAG ABM2 simulates individual and household transportation decisions that compose their daily travel itinerary. People travel for activities such as work, school, shopping, healthcare, and recreational, and the ABM2 predicts where, when, and how this travel occurs. SANDAG ABM2 addresses both household level and person level travel choices, including intra-household interaction between household members. ABM2 consists of a suite of models for residence travel, special market, including San Diego International Airport and cross-border express airport, Mexican cross-border, overnight visitors, and external trips. And we also, as I mentioned, about the heavy truck and the commercial vehicle travel. So the ABM2 is based upon empirical data such as travel surveys, vehicle counts, transit ridership data, and national census data collected by SANDAG, Caltrans, and the federal government. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the residence travel model. It simulates individual and household travel decisions through tools a journey that begins and ends at home. A tour includes a train of trips, segments of travel within a given origin and destination. The advantage of modeling tours and trips hierarchy is to ensure spatial, temporal, and modal consistency and integrity across trips within a tour. So it starts with generating a representative population that looks like the population in San Diego. Once a representative population is created, the model predicts long-term and medium-term decisions, such as the choice of work or school location and a household's choice of number of cars to own. Next, each person's day is scheduled, taking into account the priority of various activities and interactions among the household members. Once all journeys to and from home have been scheduled, the model predicts specific travel details such as mode, the number of stops to make, where to stop, and when to depart from each stop to continue the tour. It generates a trip diary for each person in the region. While the residence travel model predicts residence travel, the special market models, airport, cross-border, overnight visitors, and external trips, heavy truck, and commercial travel captures travel generated by visitors, Mexican residents, commercial vehicle, and freight transportation. So all the auto trips generated from these special models and from the residence travel model are summed up by origin and destination, traffic analysis zones, we call tags, and by time of day, we have 5 time of day, and assigned to the highway networks. And transit trips are summed up by pseudo tags we call transit access point tag, and by time of day and assigned to transit networks. The assignment outputs such as VMT by speed bin by vehicle class are used to generate input for MFAC, CARB's emission modeling software, MFAC, to generate the emission output. So I'm done with my part of presentation.
Thank you, Ing. Are there any questions for Ing on the transportation model that we'll be using for the conformity analysis? Okay. So the next component for this conformity criterion procedures is the latest emissions model and emissions budgets. And so I wanted to note that on March 1st, 2018, ARB released MFAC 2017 version 1.0.2 to the public. And on August 15, 2019, the US EPA approved MFAC 2017 for use in conformity determinations and allowed for a 2-year grace period. And we will be using MFAC 2017 for conducting the conformity analysis for the 2021 RTIP. We will be taking the travel activity data from the activity-based model that Ing just discussed in detail in the last component of this item, and then using those the outputs from the ABM2 will be fed into MFAC 2017 to provide the emissions data for this analysis. And we will be utilizing the emissions budgets from the 2008 8-hour ozone attainment plan for San Diego County, which were found adequate for transportation conformity purposes by US EPA effective December 4th, 2017. And we will be utilizing those for that analysis. For our conformity years, we have selected years to comply with 40 CFR 93-106A1, 93-118A, and 93-119G. And according to these sections of the conformity rule, the first horizon year must be within 10 years of the base year utilized to validate the transportation model, which is 2016. Our first analysis year will be 2023. The last horizon year must be the year of the transportation plan's forecast, which is 2050. And then the interim horizon years may be no more than 10 years apart, and we'll be modeling 2030 and 2040. So we will be including those years and demonstrating conformity both to the 2008 and 2015 8-hour ozone standards. Are there any questions regarding the budgets or conformity analysis years or the use of MFAC 2017? Sam, do we have any hands up?
No, we do not have any hands up.
Okay. So the next item is the transportation control measures, and there are 4 federally approved transportation control measures that must be implemented in San Diego, which the SIP refers to as transportation tactics. These include ride sharing, transit improvements, traffic flow improvements, and bicycle facilities and programs. And these TCMs were established in the 1982 SIP, which identified general objectives and implementing actions for each tactic. And these have been fully implemented as called for in the SIP, but ride sharing, transit, bicycling, and traffic flow improvements continue to be funded, although this level of implementation established in the SIP has been surpassed. Are there any questions regarding the TCMs? Okay, then I will turn it over to Sue for the last component, which is the public involvement and outreach.
Thanks, Rachel. So attachment 4 contains our public participation policy, which is board policy number 25. And this should begin on page 51 of your packet. On page 54, it discusses what is required for the RTIP under letter B. And as I had mentioned before, under the schedule, SANDAG plans to release the conformity analysis for a 30-day public comment period as required in the plan and hold a public hearing at the February 2021 Transportation Committee meeting. As the 2021 RTIP will be based on the projects in the 2019 Federal Regional Transportation Plan, the public involvement strategy for the federal RTP is also included beginning on page 61. The public outreach for the 2021 RTIP relies heavily on the strategy and outreach events used for the 2019 federal RTP. So are there any questions on the public participation plan?
Any questions for Sue? Okay. So just as a reminder, we will be sending out the project list to the CWG for interagency consultation at the end of July, and then discussing the list of projects at the August 5th CWG meeting. So we'll be bringing future updates to this group as we move through the process with the 2021 RTIP development. So we'll look forward to your input on the RTIP at those future touch points. So our next item is an information discussion item. We included a fact sheet that was available on the federal website for the Safe Vehicle Rules Part 2. The Safer Affordable Vehicle, Fuel Efficient Vehicle Safe Rule for model years 2021 to 2026 was jointly published in the Federal Register on April 30th. By NHTSA and EPA, and the rule became effective on June 29th, 2020. And after further analysis, it was deemed that there were not additional adjustment factors that were needed to apply the Safe Rule Part 2 for use with MFAC for conformity determinations. So we just included this as a piece of information with the fact sheet. I don't know if John or anybody else wants to share any additional information on the Safe Rule Part 2, but it is now effective as of June 29th.
Yeah, hi Rachel, this is Mani here, Nesa Mani from CARB. Hey, I just want to give a quick update to that. I think what you said is absolutely right. CARB staff also went and developed the adjustment factor for CO2 emission rates, and we released early this week. Again, it's not applicable for conformity, as you said. The adjustment factors that we released as part of the first part of the SAFE rule. That's the adjustment. We don't need any additional adjustment factor for part 2 of the rule. But I just want to let everybody know in the group there is a CO2 adjustment factor which was released earlier this week. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that additional information, Esamani. We did receive that email from ARB, so we are aware of that for the CO2 side.
Thank you.
Thank you. So item number 8 is upcoming meetings. Our next CWG meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, August 5th at 10:30, and we will likely be using the WebEx format again. So hopefully folks found that easy to use today. Another upcoming meeting I wanted to highlight is the MFAC 2020X workshop. It's going to be held by ARB on July 30th from 10 to 4:30. And I think that will be available for digital participation. So for those who might be interested, that's coming up here at the end of this month. Nick had also highlighted with the SIP item, the 2 workshops that are coming up in July, also available for digital participation for the draft SIP. And are there any other pieces of information or upcoming meetings that the group would like to share?
No, this is just Joseph on Federal Highways. I just wanted to thank you for a very thorough and excellent discussion today. It was very well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. We're glad you're able to participate today.
Hey, Rachel, I did see Nick Cormier's hand go up ever so briefly. I didn't know if he had a comment.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Just a real quick comment on the last item on the SAFE rules. I just did want to throw out there that the current SIP does reflect the safe vehicles rule that in the factors that Mon was talking about. So just in case there was some interest in that, and if that was included in our SIP, it was. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. That was it.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Nick. Any other information to share with the group? Okay. If not, I want to thank everyone for your participation today, and we'll look forward to having you on the call next month at our August meeting. So thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.